Erie Stormlight here with a video on the Monomyth and how I believe it pertains to folk healing and just comparative religion in general. The Monomyth was first proposed by Joseph Campbell in 1949 in his book Hero of a Thousand Faces. He is a professor of comparative religion and mythology, and he started noticing certain trends and patterns. In general, the reason I believe this applies to folk magic and folk healing is these are the mythologies, these are the religions that gave us the practices that we are using. It follows that our lives are going to be heavily influenced by these patterns, by this method of storytelling. It applies across religions, and while I am aware there are several major arguments about how accurate or useful of a tool it is, for me it has been very helpful. So I'm going to explain my beliefs and my thoughts about it. To me in particular, it applies because I am a big proponent that all truth comes from a single source. However you choose to define that source is up to you. Whether you refer to that source as God, Allah, Nirvana, whichever other term of deity or enlightenment or higher power you wish to use, I don't have a problem with that. I believe that as long as we are seeking to do good and to find light and improvement in our lives, then I don't particularly care what religion you are. I don't particularly care as long as you are not hurting yourself and you are not hurting others. So why should I think I have the right to judge someone because they believe differently? That just doesn't make sense to me. So in general, that's how I got to my use of the Monomyth. Now I'm actually going to go through the stages of the Monomyth and how it applies to our experiences in mortality and throughout just this life as we have it, and apply it to modern examples of storytelling, ancient examples of storytelling, and how these same cycles often depict themselves in our personal lives. In short, Joseph Campbell summarizes very concisely the Monomyth in this quote: "A hero ventures forth from the world of common day into a region of supernatural wonder. Fabulous forces are there encountered, and a decisive victory is won. The hero comes back from this mysterious adventure with the power to bestow boons on his fellow man." This is from the book The Hero of a Thousand Faces on page 23. It's also important to note that there are connections between the Monomyth and Carl Jung's analytical psychology, specifically the concepts of character archetypes, the shadow, and the self. So a real quick rundown of the list, the 17 stages of the Monomyth, or the hero's journey, or the circular storytelling as described by Joseph Campbell. It's broken into 3 parts: departure, initiation, and return. In departure, we have the call to adventure, refusal of the call, supernatural aid, the crossing of the first threshold, and the belly of the whale. In the second segment, in initiation, we have the road of trials, meeting with the goddess, woman as the temptress, atonement with the father, and apotheosis. And in the third section, in the return, we have the ultimate boon, refusal of the return, the magic flight, rescue from without, the crossing of the return threshold, master of 2 worlds, and freedom to live. In modern discussions of this, a lot of it's been simplified and condensed because several of those steps aren't linear. They don't go one after another. Actually, none of this is strictly linear. In most storytelling, you will identify this pattern and find that to tell a more engaging story, some of the pieces have been rearranged, or that they just aren't even included. So it's also possible to find several of these things under different names when discussed by different people. So, for example, another very common breakdown of it was penned by Christopher Vogler in 2007 in his book, The Writer's Journey, an explanation of the hero's journey, where he breaks the departure down into ordinary world, call to adventure, refusal of the call, meeting with the mentor, crossing the first threshold. He breaks down the second section, initiation, into tests, allies, and enemies, approach to the inmost cave, the ordeal, and reward. And he breaks down the third section, return, into the road back, the resurrection, and return with the elixir. He consolidated several of the steps with with Joseph Campbell's original depiction to facilitate an easier discussion with a more modern audience. So I'm going to kind of use pieces interchangeably. So the first stage is the ordinary world. This is our life before receiving the call, our current normal in our world or life where there is some injustice, something out of alignment, something that needs changed. The ordinary world for many of the Greek heroes was before they got called to do a quest. Ordinary world in modern times is usually, I'm just going about doing my thing, living my life, and then I get this prompting, I get this feeling, I get this pull to a particular religion, a particular practice, or sometimes even a particular person who can then be a mentor and a teacher. Then we have the call to adventure, which is after that slight pulling, there's a very direct message of, you need to change something. Most religions have some form of being called. Christians, for example, they use the phrase, many are called but few are chosen. Many Christians describe having either a still small voice, a burning in the bosom, some sort of feeling that they've come home. You'll also find that exact same phrase, a feeling of coming home, in many of the pagan religions, where many people will talk about how their previous life, something felt off, something felt missing, and then they find the pagan practice, the god or deity that they interact with, and it just felt like something clicked. That was their call to adventure, their call home. In the next step, the refusal of the call, there's a huge breakdown of reasons that heroes and we ourselves reject the call. Often, potential heroes and healers and just people in general refuse the call due to fear of some sort of reprisal, of societal issues, or a sense of inadequacy, that they can't do what they're being asked to. In a religious sense, this is often because the necessary changes imply a lot of work, a lot of sacrifice. These sacrifices might be relationships, addictions, food items, behaviors, or any number of other aspects of our lives that need to be changed for the sake of this call, for the sake of our desire to grow and change, to integrate ourselves into a new belief system. The next step is meeting with the mentor. Most religions and spiritual paths include a belief in a higher power that graces us with assistance. In storytelling, this is usually when a mentor figure finds the hero and says, I have gifts, or I have knowledge to impart to you. This is often when we, as healers or converts to a new religion, first encounter a priest, a priestess, an expert in their craft, someone who can guide us in our learning, in our journey. In mythology and storytelling, this is often an older mentor. So, for example, in Lord of the Rings, you have Gandalf. In Star Wars, you have Obi-Wan and Yoda. And in the King Arthur stories, we have Merlin. Someone who has been around the block before, who has seen the pitfalls in life, and can help us learn and grow. The next step is crossing the first threshold. This is our first hurdle. In a lot of stories, this is a rite of initiation. In religion, that could be baptism, that could be your consecration, that can be an initiation ritual, or in a more personal or a closed practice, that might be a personal covenant made to a higher power. In mythology, this is usually a physical crossing of a boundary or entering an altered state of reality. So, for example, going back to Lord of the Rings, it's Frodo and the other hobbits crossing the river out of the Shire. In Star Wars, Luke, when he first leaves Tatooine, and King Arthur when he leaves Camelot to begin his quest. And the next step, which has been broken into many pieces in Joseph Campbell's version, consolidating into the later version of tests, allies, and enemies. This is where the hero, or ourselves, faces pushback or resistance to the changes we're making. In a religious sense, this is often a trial of faith. You've started making the changes, and someone who you haven't seen in a long time shows up and is like, wait, but you used to be this way. Why aren't you drinking alcohol now? Or why aren't you taking the Lord's name in vain anymore? Or why aren't you fill in any number of other behaviors that change as we grow and progress along our path? Often it takes the form of family, friends, or acquaintances trying to pull us back into old patterns of behavior. In storytelling, this would be Frodo when he first gets injured on Weathertop, the Millennium Falcon being caught on the Death Star, those type of events. The early problem where you go, oh no, how's our hero going to resolve this? How are we going to find the faith and the strength to continue forward? Next, approach the innermost cave, sometimes called rising action. This is the series of trials that we go through, that our characters go through. It's the bulk of the story when you're talking about mythology or storytelling. And in our lives, you could argue that the vast majority of our life fits this part of the pattern. In Joseph Campbell's original work, it includes the steps of meeting with the goddess, woman as temptress, atonement with the father, and apotheosis. So, while that is incredibly gendered in the way it was originally presented, remember it is from 1949. It is an older method of speaking, and it is not necessarily gendered. Because meeting with the goddess, if you're dealing with a heroine, they are usually meeting with someone of the opposite gender. So they would be meeting with a god. Most of our mythological examples of heroes are men, which is why it is often depicted as meeting the goddess or woman as temptress. But it goes both ways. If you are dealing with other types of attraction, it's usually whoever the hero is attracted to. That is the meeting with the goddess. That is the meeting the woman as temptress. It takes on the form of whoever the story is about, what type of person they're attracted to. Atonement with the father, also, while incredibly gendered because most authority figures throughout history have been masculine, most of the judges and rulers have been kings and therefore had been men. Again, not necessarily a male role or an encounter with a male being. It's the being who has authority over your life. Some religious and mythological examples include the temptations of Christ before he began his ministry, the trials of Hercules, and Luke losing Obi-Wan, destroying the Death Star, losing his hand on Cloud City. These are the types of trials we're talking about. The things that alter your life and you can't really come back from it. It is a moment of transition that changes you permanently. In my own life, I have several examples. When I went to be a full-time missionary, that was an ordeal. That was hard. It was not a pleasant time in my life. I met so many wonderful people and I saw so many wonderful things, but it was not easy. It was hard. This would also be part of my relationship where I got married and divorced. That would fall under this. In our lives as healers, this often takes the form of recurring lessons. Problem clients, abusive relationships, just the general act of doing spiritual work in a mortal world. The next step is the ordeal. This is what everything's been building to. It is the climax of the story. Or in our life, it is the final hurdle. It is that big thing we've been trying to accomplish or get away from, or just the last step before reaching what we want. In storytelling, this is also called the belly of the whale or belly of the beast or the innermost cave. Examples in mythology and religion include Odin sacrificing himself on Yggdrasil, Christ on the cross, Theseus facing the Minotaur, going back to Lord of the Rings again, Frodo inside the volcano, and in Star Wars, Luke facing the Emperor. This is the superlative problem of the story or in that part of our lives. In our own lives, it often takes the form of overcoming an addiction, leaving a toxic relationship, changing religions, an irreparable physical injury, or anything else that changes our life in a way that cannot be undone. The next step is the reward, or apotheosis, also called the ultimate boon. This is where the hero completes their quest, or we receive a hard-won realization or breakthrough. In Lord of the Rings, it's when Gollum falls into the lava with the ring. It's destroyed. Vader redeems himself by slaying the Emperor. Luke saves Anakin because he's no longer Vader. He's been redeemed. Arthur wins the battle and recovers the Holy Grail. This is in personal life, in our experiences, usually mastering of a skill, healing from a trauma, or a similar milestone. A graduation from school could fit this description. It's just, again, it's part of a cycle. It's a way to view and interpret our lives. The road back. So Joseph Campbell also included multiple steps here that in modern discussion of the hero's journey have been all put together as the road back, because the road back can take several different forms. The first is resurrection. So in the case of a hero who had to die to accomplish their task, they're brought back to life. They, either through their own power or deific intervention, they have somehow been brought back. Two is the refusal of the return. Because honestly, who wants an ordinary life after they've gone on this amazing mythic adventure? Third is the magic flight. Sometimes in these stories, it's necessary to escape with magical aid, because a lot of times the guardians of the final boon or the magic elixir, whatever, the Holy Grail, what we were trying to achieve, they don't want to let go. They want to hang on to it. Rescue from without. Sometimes we are not able to escape on our own. In case of dreams and journeys into magical realms, sometimes you need someone on the other side to hold the door open so that you can get back out. Crossing the return threshold. You have to survive reintegration into the ordinary world, into society. Final step is master of both worlds. You have gone through the journey. You have learned the message. You have understood what was to be gained through the experience. In this stage, the hero is familiar with both the world they have left and the magical world they have traveled through. In mythology and religion, this would include savior figures. So Christ's resurrection or Odin's mastery of the mysteries. This is when They have power over both physical mortal world and spiritual abilities. In our lives, it often takes form of being able to help other people, having gained the skills and knowledge necessary to perform services on their benefit or for their benefit, and having the experience of having gone through traumatic experiences so that we can then encourage and help and uplift people through their own experiences. For all intents and purposes, this is where the story begins anew. I view the hero's journey as a spiral where instead of just being a circle like most depictions of the hero journey are, I prefer to see it as an ascending spiral going up, because each revolution is a new story, is a new realization, is a new mastery that we have gained. We're all the hero of our own journey. At least we like to think we are. But that also means sometimes we're the villain in someone else's story, or we're the mentor in their story. Sometimes we're more than one. It is useful to have patterns like this to draw on because it's essentially shorthand. It allows us to take a very complex issue and go, oh, I have seen this before, and allow us to communicate quickly a lot of information. Our own lives are made up of a series of stories, a series of experiences. And I use this to help, one, comfort my clients, and two, just to interact with them. Throughout this recording, throughout this video, I've talked about a wide variety of myths and religions and stories. I can help people by saying, remember Ahsoka? Remember how bratty she was at the beginning when she was first introduced? Just because someone's a brat when you first meet them doesn't mean they're going to stay that way. In Star Wars, Ahsoka didn't. But she only gained that wisdom, that ability to be a mentor, by going through some serious shit. She fought in a war as a child. Yes, she's a fictional character. But in many ways, having fictional characters to relate to is safer and easier for someone in trauma, in a trauma response, than a real person. Because there's a degree of separation. I hope that it helps people. And thank you for watching, however much or however little you did. Thank you. Bye.